So today we're gonna look into AWS Amazon API Gateway. So as you can see here in the diagram, so API acts as an intermediary between the client and AWS configured backend resources. If your client is trying to access some of the backend resources that you configure in your cloud solution, so API Amazon API Gateway help you be able to access some of those resources. So what is AWS API Gateway? It's a fully managed services that enable developers to create, you can also publish, maintain, monitor, and secure API at any scale. So it acts as a front door, as we just discussed, for application to access data, business logic that you just configured or you just deployed in some of the API resources like Lambda functions, or function from backend services. As we just look at AWS services, or maybe on-premise resources. So what are some of the functions that the features that can even as a developers, what are some of those features that you should go ahead and choose to implement Amazon API Gateway? So Amazon API Gateway, acts as an API management, as we just discussed here. So the API Gateway provide a comprehensive set of tools for API management, including the API creation, deployment, versioning. So developers can define RESTful API or maybe WebLogic, an API using simple configuration interface, or by maybe importing Swagger on API specification. So you can use Swagger tool, OpenAI API, to develop some of your API, and then you can deploy those API in maybe backend resources, and how some of the resources from maybe using external application that I want to access your backend, that you can direct them to Amazon API Gateway. So the next function that we have is endpoint configuration. So with the API Gateway, developers can define endpoints for APIs and configure various aspects such as request, response transformation, and caching, throttling, and error handling. So they can also set up custom domain names to expose API using their own branded URLs. So as you can just discuss here, you can just have your own endpoint payloads and expose them to some API, some backend API, or from an external application API, through API Gateway. So the next function, API Gateway, is integration with AWS services. So API Gateway seamlessly integrate with various API services, allowing developers to build serverless application or microservices actually easily. So it supports integration with AWS Lambda function, AWS HTTP endpoint, AWS Elastic Beanstalk application, and also AWS EC2 service instances. Um, so what we are talking here in a nutshell is, as you try to, if you deploy your application to the backend, maybe you develop, through Elastic Beanstalk application, and then you deploy some of those API at the backend. So you can use API Gateway to be able to manage your API at the backend. So the next function is authorization and authentication. So API Gateway provides built-in support for authentication and authorization mechanisms to control access to API. So it supports standard authentication, authentication methods such as AWS Identity and access management. We have IAM. It's one of the AWS resources that we can use, and also we can have Lambda authorizer, Amazon Cognito's users pool, and also customer users. So you can use IAM to protect some of the resources at the backend. So any application from external, from maybe a third party application, can be able to access your application at the backend using IAM. So the next function we have the API, API gateway. It offers robust security features to protect the API and data. So it encrypt Data in transit using HTTP and HTTPS. Also, we can use TLS with AWS key management services. We have KMS in AWS for encryption, REST, and also provide grain access control through IAM policy and resources policy. So the other function is, monitoring and logging. So AWS API offer comprehensive monitoring and logging capability to track API usage, performance metrics, and also errors. So it integrates with AWS CloudWatch to provide a real monitoring for the login API request, enabling developers to identify and troubleshoot issues quickly. And also you can integrate with Grafana too. That's another tool that we can use. So we have another function, we use API gateway. It's scalable and high availability. So API gateway is designed to scale automatically to handle any amount of traffic, from few requests per day to millions of requests per second. It's highly available and distributed across multiple AWS availability zones. So ensure high reliability and fault tolerance and also resiliency. So in overall, so API gateway simplifies, the process of building, deploying, and managing API in the AWS cloud environments, allowing developers to focus on building innovative application without worrying about the underneath infrastructure. So it's offers rich features for API management, security, scalability, monitoring, making it a powerful tool for building a modern, scalable, and secure application.